Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Sarah McLaughlin from um, Sarah is a senior scholar at the Fire, and she studies or she focuses mainly on global expression. Um, and I saw a lot of her work when she was talking about foreign governments interfering in universities, especially government like the government of China. And she's got a recent book out called Authoritarians in the Academy, which is about foreign interference in universities. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Um, so your book, I mean, it just came out. It's been what, 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks, something
Yeah,
like that.
a little under
Uh,
a month.
yeah. Well, look, it was a really interesting read. It's something I've kind of been talking about, but more from um, the perspective of places like Qatar. Because I remember going, I think it was 2015. I was at an event at Harvard, and we were in an antechamber at one point, myself and a few people, I think like Melissa Chen was one of them, and we just noticed all this stuff about money coming in from the Middle East, Gulf countries, and it was all to promote Sharia and stuff like that. And that was a little concerning because at that point I was focusing a lot on Islam, and so yeah, we just noticed that. So since then, I've kind of been watching it off and on about foreign interference in schools and that how that affects students here. So if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about your book and how it started and like what you've been looking at, kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been at Fire for a long time. I actually realized this month is 13 years. And so for a lot of those early years that I was at Fire, I was on our case team, like our campus case team.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working with students and faculty members who were dealing with some kind of censorship issue on campus, fired for a tweet, being put on suspension for teaching a book that people didn't like, all the basic, kinds of standard cases that we see with censorship on US campuses. But I was starting to notice over time, I have a lot of personal interest in global censorship issues. I've been writing about it for a decade. I was starting to notice that I was seeing some overlap between the work I was doing on campus cases and the global censorship issues that I was talking about. And so that was primarily was coming in the form of China's censorship and the way that it was starting to be felt on U.S. campuses. And there are a lot of different ways that this happens. One of the primary ways that I'm especially interested in is with international students. So how these students come to the United States, they expect to be able to speak freely. Students coming from China, and then they find that one, the Chinese government has followed them, that they are still facing threats, censorship, repression, even though they're thousands of miles away from home. And they're also finding that they can't necessarily rely on university leadership to protect their rights against the Chinese government. And I think that may be in part because of the other side of this issue, which is universities' entanglements with the Chinese government. So that's something I've been writing about for a while, and why I decided to write this book. And you mentioned Qatar. That's something I discuss in the book as well, because Qatar and the UAE, those are major destinations for American satellite campuses, because there's a lot of financial investment, especially from the government in those countries. And it's for cash-strapped universities, it's a great opportunity. But as I write about, if you pursue something for financial reasons, you may discover that you are abandoning your values in the process, and that if the only reason is money, you may be doing things for that money that are against your values, which I think we have seen direct examples of in those countries, and especially at Qatari campuses.
About the Chinese, uh, like with the students. So one of the things you just mentioned now, and you do talk about it a bit in your book, was the pressure from the government. So I mean, hear about it in Canada as well, where foreign students or Chinese students that have come here, they're feeling pressured to comply with what the CCP wants, And if, yes, they're in Canada, they're not in China, but their families are still back home, so they can apply pressure that way. I also know it from people, again, like I said, I was pretty vocal about Islam, and I know it from people when I was working a lot with that, who were a lot of Iranians. They were facing the same kind of pressure. Um, I mean, Iran doesn't have the money or the resources at the moment that Qatar does to fund universities, but if they're putting pressure on students, I mean, even though there's a whole Shia Sunni thing, which I don't want to get into, but Iran still is relatively close with Qatar because, Qatar funds a lot of Iranian, whatever, allies, let's just say. But yeah, so I mean, I saw it from that aspect, but, I never really thought about the financial side of it. But let's like, take a university like Harvard. Harvard's got a giant endowment. Would they feel that much pressure from purse strings being cut? Or, are they just at that point doing it for greed?
Oh, so that's a great example because one of the recommendations I have in the book for, how we could start to fix this to the extent that it can be fixed, is to rely on universities like Harvard that can take a financial hit because they have, an endowment that's bigger than the GDP of a bunch of countries. Uh, I think we can expect on the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons to be able to weather those storms and be able to say, okay, we're going to take a hit for a couple years from the Chinese government, but our values are worth that. I think the past few months in the US have complicated that question, with all these cuts to university funding. But we have at least seen Harvard be willing to say we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to, fight First Amendment violations coming from the Trump administration, which is good. That is something we want to see, and that's a sign that maybe we can look to these universities and say, "All right, Harvard, you recognize that you need to fight what's happening here, so you need to fight it on all fronts." But Harvard has, for the most part, stood alone on that front. So, to what extent we can trust that universities are willing to say, all right, we're going to take a financial hit to protect our values. If you look at Colombia, I don't think you find great evidence for that possibility. But the other risk of what's happening, with these funding cuts in the U.S., my fear is that universities that don't stand up for themselves and fight it out in court, they're going to say, all right, well, we have to get funding somewhere else. Um, I have some guesses about where they might look. And
Yeah.
I don't feel great about, the outcomes of that. But yeah, so to answer the broader question, universities that can weather the storm need to be trusted to set that standard. And Harvard has done a lot of things that have not been good for free speech in the past. And even one story I talk about in the book, Harvard Law in 2015, a vice dean pressured a Chinese dissident on campus to reschedule and ultimately cancel an event because it coincided with Harvard's president's trip to China to meet Xi Jinping, and it would be an embarrassment for the university to be hosting that. So,
Yeah.
Harvard has not always, done itself proud on this front, but we don't want to say because a university has done bad things in the past, they can't reform. What I want to see is for Harvard to say, all right, we're standing up for our values now and we're going to stand up for them in the future. And I hope that that's the case. And I will be advocating for that.
Just sticking with Harvard because I mean I know like the Fire puts out their standings of where universities rank on free speech, and I think a couple of years ago they were at the bottom. Now they're
Mm-hmm.
they moved up to like 13th from the bottom or something like that. They're still far down the list of like free
Sure.
speech universities, but it's okay. So going back to Jonathan Rauch's book, like Kindly Inquisitors, if you look at what's been going on campus since the late 90s, and I mean, you can start, some of it started with the first political correctness stuff in the late 80s, but you can actually look at that and I mean, foreign governments can use that to their advantage. So it's okay, so you've got all these speech codes put in now. You've got all these, you know, different offenses that you can punish students and professors and administrators for. I mean, a foreign government can use those to their advantage, saying,
Yep.
okay, so I mean, they don't even if they're not funding a university, but they've got, so let's say China, they've got students at that university who they've given visas to. They can pressure those students to use, like Title IX or something like that, and the abuses that the universities themselves have been, like doing of their own policies. They can use that
Yeah,
to further, further censorship. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I think a good way to look at speech codes like these are as a Pandora's box of some sort, where um, I think universities have written these policies because they think they need to be responsive to hate and sensitivity, um, bias, things like that on campus. But um, when you are careless when you write these policies and you don't think ahead to understand the First Amendment standards around speech, around how we navigate questions of how we must respond to hateful speech and what's the wisest and sometimes the First Amendment way, the legal way, you're going to create standards that can be open to abuse for anyone. And that's exactly what I think we've seen in some cases. We have seen, especially from student groups who are more supportive of the Chinese government, arguments being made that the university has a responsibility to act. To protect them from biased and hateful and hurtful speech. And the speech in question in these cases has sometimes been from people talking about human rights in Xinjiang, human rights in Tibet. And so this is the problem with speech codes like these. You can create a tool, and it's not just a tool that's used by people that you think are only going to want to censor the worst speech. That's not how it's going to go. These are going to be for everyone to use. And I think it's gotten even more complicated because as universities have become these global institutions with people from around the world on their campuses, you have administrators that are responsible for enforcing these speech codes and these policies who aren't going to understand the political complexities of all the different students from all around the world on their campuses. They're not going to get that you might have a student coming to you wanting you to handle a speech issue that's really complicated and covers maybe hundreds of years of political disputes, and it's maybe not the best idea for someone who doesn't know anything about the history of that country to be saying, all right, yeah, we're going to cancel this speaker, we're going to postpone this event because it's controversial or offensive. You have the potential to wade into just outlandish, um, minefields around speech and politics. And there's one very easy way to not have to do that. And it's to say, we are going to have viewpoint neutral policies where we don't pick and choose who gets to speak. That's really the only way to avoid doing this. And so I think that's, the number one thing that universities need to do. Not just for the questions I talk about in the book about foreign censorship issues and foreign politics, but just even here in the U.S. Having viewpoint neutral policies. So when there's a horrible tragedy about an assassination on a
you know,
campus, you're not picking and choosing what people can say about it and what's too offensive and what's too hurtful. You could say these are our First Amendment standard policies and we're sticking with them, and it's the much wiser, smarter thing to do.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you on that, but just to play devil's advocate, aren't you just you're just abdicating all responsibility for what people say then to like the university is just saying, okay, you know what, we're going to be neutral, we're not saying anything, and so I'm looking at it this way, like people have been so conditioned to not be hurt over the last 20, 30 years, and that's built on top of each other. So now when the university does that, you're going to get people saying, well, no, it is your responsibility because I'm paying money to be here and you're supposed to protect me and you're not protecting my feelings. And I mean, like how do they effectively do that without getting that backlash as well?
Sure. So I think there's a couple ways to answer that. The first is, I actually do think this is part of the problem with having, luxury price tag universities. You are going to get people who say, I'm paying a luxury price tag. Why am I not getting a luxury experience?
Mhm.
I think there is, that's a little bit downstream of the issue of the cost of
Hmm.
universities in the US, but
Yeah.
we can leave that for another time.
Mhm.
But there are things universities can do. You know, they can ensure students have, places where they feel free to express themselves. They can, I think you could say to students, if there's speech you don't like, you're free to use your own speech. And I think that's the best way forward. But universities can also advise students, if there's an event you don't like, you could protest it, but you can also not attend. You don't have to partake in speech you don't want to participate in. You can hate it, you can loathe it, you can debate it, you can ignore it. The only thing you can't do is censor it. I think there are ways that universities can be wiser about how they talk about these things. But ultimately, they have to inform students that their number one responsibility is to be a university, a place for truth seeking, a place for research, a place for advancement of knowledge. And we get that way through speech. We get that way through research. We get that way through sometimes encountering and working with uncomfortable ideas that we find deeply upsetting. So ultimately, the university have to be a place where these kinds of things can take place. And it can't be, that luxury space where you don't have to hear or see things you don't like, because then it's not really so much a university. It's not fulfilling that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I don't know if it was just like I know Jonathan Haidt said this in some talks, but I don't know if it was in one of his books or if it was the book that he wrote with Greg Lukianoff, but where he talks about, the university has to decide, is it going to be for truth or is it going to be for social justice? Because the two can't coexist. Like the social justice as it's being performed now, um, you know, like those two things can't exist. If you're for truth, you're gonna upset people. You can't have lists of, untouchable topics and, like groups that you can't disparage and things like that. You
And I
can't.
think even if you want to, and I think I agree with that, but I think also universities can say to students that students' missions can be social justice, but even in the goal of social justice, you can't get there without upsetting or offending some people, because the question of what is justice itself is a very contested idea. And so, even if your goal isn't just the advancement of truth, but is also justice, you might have to hurt some feelings along to that
Yeah.
too.
Okay. So one of the things I did a lot of work. I was a civilian contractor with the military, and I did a lot of work overseas. And I got back in 2014, and Canada never had the free speech culture or the laws that the U.S. had. We've always had hate speech laws. Our Constitution has affirmative action baked right into it, and it says that marginalized groups will be treated, differently. Like, I mean, it's I don't have the exact wording, but it gives them a lot of protections. But even what free speech we had, I came back and I saw how bad it was. Like there was, you know, um, people getting fired or getting attacked for disparaging Islam and or what's considered disparaging, like critiquing Islam, like critiquing the hijab or critiquing, killing of apostates and things like that, and the blasphemy laws. And they were getting attacked for that. And one of my biggest worries was you're gonna get an overcorrection. Um, Now Hitchens used to use this a lot, and it was from the play Man for All Seasons, where Thomas More is talking to the British Inquisitor or whatever the guy was, Roper, and he said, you'd burn down the laws to catch the devil. This guy Roper says, "Yep, I'd burn down every single law in England if I could catch the devil." And then Thomas More's question is, "What do you do when the devil turns around and faces you?" Like all the laws are gone. You have no protection. A lot of the academy, um, you know, progressive left, woke left, whatever you want to call it, like that aspect of the left, have been doing their best to cut down laws. I mean, Crenshaw, when she started writing about intersectionality, she said it straight out. We have to get away from the liberal ethic and have a politics of identity. And so they wanted to get rid of civil rights. I mean, Derek Bell, like his paper, "Serving Two Masters," was about. I mean, it was a huge critique of Brown versus the Board of Education. So they've been doing that now. Okay, with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and then you've got all these people saying some pretty horrendous stuff on social media, and you're getting now from the right saying, okay, these people have to be fired. I think it's got to be looked at case by case because I think some cases, yes, that person needs to be gone. Um, but for the most part, they're being assholes, and there's not much you can do. I mean, but
That's
it's,
still legal.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, like that, I'm, you're getting those overcorrections. You've been getting them for a little bit where it's coming back and it's like, oh, you want to use race? Fine. Well, we use race. We'll do this. Like, it's just the whole grievance industry has been growing and it's now expanding to all sides.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot going wrong in the past couple of decades, but I think what makes what's happening right now in the assassination unique is that we're seeing the government officials and
Mhm.
legislators picking up. I think a lot of the oar here on the work to not just not just get people fired for private employment or things like that, but to actually pursue First Amendment violations in service of this. And so that's what's especially worrying here. Before we started recording, we were talking about AG Pam Bondi saying hate speech is not free speech, and it's a lot of the things that I think people have grown accustomed to seeing as a left wing argument. Because it's something we've heard a lot over the past couple of decades, and that have been very much heavily championed in European nations. This idea that hate speech isn't free speech, that the government has a role in stopping hate to ensure societal comfort and protection is ensured. And what I've been warning about for a very long time, especially to people who I think are politically on the left, is that you may not like what the government does if they decide to crack down on hate speech. And I think that's what we're going to see here, and what we're already seeing here. A lot of people are perhaps going to be shocked that the government is now going to be defining hate speech as saying unkind things about Charlie Kirk's death. And
Yeah.
so it's, but we're seeing legislators, all across the country demand that public universities fire faculty members for speech about Charlie Kirk, which creates First Amendment issues. That we're seeing, a supercharged uh, reaction to this that's moved beyond a cultural question, is moving very swiftly into legal questions, I think.
Yeah. I mean, okay, there's also a lot of emotion tied up with it. The guy obviously, I never really paid that much attention to him. Um, you know, it was background noise. Like I never considered him a racist or any of that other stuff. Yeah, it was background noise. I just never paid attention to him, so didn't realize like how big a following and everything he had. But I'm going to give you three examples of where I think firing is legitimate, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But so two were in Canada and one was in the U.S. The one in the U.S. it was a doctor with nurses and at least one patient, and he was saying how it was a good thing that Charlie Kirk died and the guy deserved to be killed. Blah 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 blah. A nurse spoke up and said, "Well, that's not appropriate." The nurse got suspended without pay. Nothing happened to the doctor. Now, I think in that particular case, you're at work, you're in front of patients, you're in front of coworkers, you're celebrating someone's death, you're a medical professional, like your oath starts with first do no harm. And so like that, I think, th- like that's my opinion that that doctor deserves to be fired. I don't think the nurse should have been suspended. Second, there was a politician in Canada, and she put it out on her webpage how she was celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, and I think that she should be forced to resign. I mean, she's a public servant, and she's putting it out on her official webpage. I think for certain things like that. And the third one was a teacher in Canada again in Toronto. He was showing to fifth and sixth graders. He showed the video of Kirk being assassinated, and then he was talking about how good it was. I mean, I think that guy deserves to go. I mean, like, he should be allowed to teach anymore. I mean, I don't know where you would stand on those three cases, but those are like the ones that like really kind of stuck out to me.
I mean, on the last one, I definitely have some questions about the age appropriateness of showing a recording of a murder to the children. That seems
Yeah,
I'm not sure what the reasoning for that would be. On the others, I it's hard to weigh in on these things without
yeah,
knowing all the details,
mm,
without knowing what a
mm,
person's contract says, what kind of protections they're offered, that kind of thing. It doesn't seem right to me that without knowing more, that the nurse would be suspended for disagreeing with someone who's saying those kinds of things. Um, as a rule, it's hard to know all of the details of all of
yeah,
these cases because there's honestly more than I can keep track of happening at this point. But as a rule, I think it's fair to say that there are going to be isolated cases where firing might be appropriate. I think if for example, if you work for a religious group or something and you're out there saying murder is good, a religious group might say, that's that's not what our Bible says.
yeah,
But uh, on the larger scale, I think we want to pursue a world where people can say unpopular things about Charlie Kirk or about any other
yeah.
high profile incident without thinking that they're not going to have a livelihood.
Okay,
It's
okay. If you're putting it out on social media and all you're saying is, I thought he was, bigoted, racist, you could call him all kinds of names. No, I don't think you should get fired. Um, I think if you're doing it at work, then it depends on, like you said, like what kind of contract you sign, what your job is. I mean, if you're a garbage collector and you're speaking with your coworker as you're collecting garbage and you're saying, I think the guy should have died, I think there's difference in that than a teacher saying it in a classroom, or a doctor saying it in front of patients and stuff like that. I think so. Like, I think each case has to be looked at it on its own basis. For the most part, no,
sure.
I don't want people fired for saying stupid things in the heat of a moment. Okay.
And I think there's also been a really unhelpful flattening around this where speech of people saying, I'm glad he's dead, they should kill more
Mm,
people, has been flattened to be on the same level as saying, I think Charlie Kirk was a bad person, and here's what he said about gun deaths. And those are being
yeah,
treated exactly the same, which I think is really disturbing, but also just what happens here when there is this kind of outrage going on. Anyone who is not saying what is socially perceived as the okay thing to say, or perhaps at this point, we're approaching the legally okay things to say. um, it's we're losing any sort of context or nuance whatsoever in the outrage over this in a way that I think is uniquely unhelpful. But obviously these kinds of things have happened before when there are big social controversies. There was a lot of this after the George Floyd killing, where all kinds of comments about it were basically being flattened, and there was no context and no nuance around what people were saying.
yeah. No, I mean it's emotionally charged, and it's. I mean, I don't want to just focus too much on that one thing, but it just, if to me, it really, like I said, I was always to anyone who would listen, I was like, look, bad things are coming from the other side, and you're stripping away all your protections. The left really doesn't have any place to hide on this, except for they can say, well, you told us that was free speech, but yet you still prosecuted people, you still punish people for saying it. I mean, the amount of teachers that got in trouble I mean, the one he didn't get fired, but he got called in because he was using the Chinese word "nega," and someone overheard him. I mean, like, come on. I mean, just
Yeah.
so you can't use sounds now. I mean, like it got very ridiculous,
Yeah.
and people are emotionally charged, and you
And
know,
when that happens, the nuance just
yeah,
disappears.
they're yeah. I mean,
It doesn't matter what was said, it matters what you heard.
yeah. I mean, okay, again, there are individual cases because I've seen stuff where people were, explicitly saying, "Go kill his wife," she needs to go now. I'm like, okay, that's getting into incitement, and that's, that you're crossing a line there, as far as I'm concerned. If you're saying, "Oh yeah, I'm glad he died," I don't think that's incitement. I just think you're a gross person. I mean, they're, two different things.
I think just more broadly, what's so disturbing about this moment, if you're someone who cares about free expression, is what happened with Kirk was really truly horrible. Seeing someone who doesn't matter whether or not you liked him or not, but seeing
Yeah,
someone be killed because they are engaging in free expression at a place that's specifically suited and designed to host free expression. That's those are the kinds of things that you can't have in a place where free expression is protected. You can't truly have free speech if you're worried someone's going to shoot you for saying something.
yeah.
But so that's horrific. And then in the aftermath of this, though, we're also seeing you know, levers of power being applied here that's moving not even just culturally, but legally to use the machinery of the state to punish people for ultimately saying things that the government doesn't like about that tragedy. And so, every aspect of this has been really horrific for free speech. But we're not going to solve the problem of, happened here by engaging in more government censorship.
No, no. But look, I think you could use what's going on now. I mean, hopefully, there is like like you don't really have a lot of violations of First Amendment. You don't have government crackdown on speech or attempts to crack down on speech, anything like that. But this could be a good moment for the academy to say, okay, we need to roll back some of these policies and regulations we have. Um, because they're seeing how it can be abused. I mean, they're getting a firsthand, example of it. So it could be a good moment for them to do that, or they might just decide, okay, guess what? We're going to need stronger regulations so we can, curb down more on speech. Um,
I agree. I think this should be the moment where that happens. But I think the difficulty and the risk here is that they're going to be under a lot of real or perceived, I mean, perceived or mostly real pressure by authorities, including the Trump administration, to crack down on speech. I mean, they already have been over the past 6 months, especially when it comes to speech about Israel. So I do worry that where this is not going to be the path to universities learning that they need to have viewpoint neutral speech policies, but instead, um, universities just feeling another form of pressure to create even more speech rules on campus. It's definitely a difficult time right now to be able to achieve that kind of reform.
okay, so I mean, yeah, a lot of the stuff Trump is doing, not a fan of. When he said, okay, we're going to go after DEI, okay, in my mind, okay, going after DEI can be a good thing depending on how it's done. First thought when he started talking about that was, well, he's just going to use a sledgehammer and like smash his way through, which is not the way to be doing it. Because I think I said it to, like, I was speaking to Greg on here, Luciano, I was speaking on here, and I said it to him, like, the University of Chicago has a chair in critical race theory now. They just started one like a couple of years ago. I don't care. I'm not arguing against that chair. Like I said, if they wanted to have a chair in alchemy, go ahead and have a chair in alchemy. But that chair in alchemy cannot tell the chemistry department how to do science. Just like that chair in critical race theory cannot then go to other departments saying you've got racist hiring standards. You've got this. Like you can't judge funding for a science experiment or research based on racial makeup of the team. You have to do it based on the science, and that's where. So you have to be very careful of that. And I think that's what needs to get done. Like you can't. I think a lot of the administrators and a lot of the DEI departments, I think they need to go. I mean, they're not so kindly inquisitors. I think that's what's driving a lot of the um, censorship on campuses. I mean, some of the universities, I think it was Yale or something like that, I just read about, where they had more administrators than students. I mean, you, it's getting to a point where it's ridiculous now.
Yeah, I mean the rate of the bureaucracy versus faculty and students is so vastly outpacing when it comes to growth that the numbers are pretty wild in that front. But to the broader question of what you're talking about, I think there are things that the Trump administration could have been doing, but the issue is that I think they have seen some problems that they have decided to respond to with means that aren't legal.
Mhm.
Um, and in some cases that's going to be like DEI things, but we're especially seeing that on the question of anti-Semitism on campus, where there is actually a role for the government to ensure that institutions receiving federal funding aren't um, being unresponsive to discrimination on campus. But instead of following the appropriate process to investigate those accusations, um, the Trump administration has just, for Harvard example, just pulled funding in a way that is not remotely responsive to the appropriate process for how that kind of thing is supposed to go. And they've also been demanding speech codes from universities that they incorporate the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So, that's definitely a problem. This idea that, and I think this is, more broadly been, a political issue around the world for a very long time of, there's a problem, so any solution is appropriate,
Yeah.
and which is how you create a lot of nightmares politically, where you say, if something's going wrong, any solution is justified,
Yeah.
and that's how we get these things.
Also, I mean, the Trump administration is not doing themselves any favors. So there's that one case. I think the guy's name was Khalil. Uh, he was an organizer with some organization. That organization had put out statements that they support Hamas. So he was going to be deported. Right? They went after him for speech, which again is like, someone read your constitution, because you can't do that. If they'd actually gone after him using that organization's own words, because I think I read the statement a while back, and it was, they said basically, oh, we support Hamas, and this is not just a statement. We'll support them materially. We'll support them. Okay, so Hamas is a registered terrorist organization. You're saying you're going to support them materially. You're the head of that organization, so sorry, that's illegal. You have to leave now. I think if they went after it that way, that would have been better, and that would have been more in line with the law than, oh, you said something we don't like, so we're going to kick you out, which I think is wrong.
Yeah, and so in the U.S. there are pretty specific standards for material support for terrorism. But on this issue more broadly of student visa holders, green card holders, Fire has actually recently sued over that because we're targeting two provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act that specifically give Marco Rubio uh, the authority to revoke passport holder or visa holders and green card holders access to this country over their speech that is protected by the First Amendment. And we believe that people here in the U.S. have First Amendment rights, and that this idea that you could have two students on campus saying the same thing, but one of them can be dragged
Yeah.
into a van and carted off for doing that just because they're here on a visa. It's pretty disturbing, and um, as you know, and as we've been talking about, I write about global free speech issues, and um, the things that I don't want to see in the United States because I'm accustomed to seeing them in very authoritarian nations, and so that's not what I want to see here. And to bring it back to the question of international students, part of the reason why I wrote this book was because I really do believe that American campuses can be something special for these students. The idea that you've lived most of your life under severe speech rules, whether it's in China, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Russia, what have you, Iran, and then you come to the United States and you feel that you can maybe for the first time express yourself, speak openly, speak honestly, and but these students have had their home governments coming after them here. And so the idea that the US is, instead of helping to, address those censorship issues for those students, adding on to the pile, it's really disturbing to me. And I think American campuses have been considered special globally for a reason, and we're severely undermining that, with these viewpoint-based deportations.
Hey, look, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I mean, you've been very generous with your time, but I have one question that I kind of always ask when I talk about free speech. So, the U.S., the First Amendment, it's a law, the government can't infringe your speech. I realize it was mainly litigated in the 20th century that, where a lot of the buttressing of the First Amendment came in. Do you think that's more important, or like take the UK? We're seeing what's going on in the UK with their speech codes, but UK had a tradition of free speech. I mean, you had Milton and Mill and then Hume and like all these people writing there. And the our ideas of enlightenment and free speech, like in Canada or the US, came out of the British Enlightenment. And so which do you think is more important, the culture or the legislation?
It's a tough question. Ultimately, what's going to make me feel most free to speak my mind is knowing that if I walk outside, the police can't arrest me for what I say. But I think the two definitely feed into each other. We're not going to keep a First Amendment forever if we have a populace that wants to vote for politicians that want to undermine it. I think the two definitely. Uh, it's hard to say, it feels a bit chicken and the egg here.
Yeah.
You know, but ultimately, what matters most to me is knowing that I have the legal protections for my speech. But I know that those legal standards may not survive a full collapse in cultural support for them.
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, you know, I look at the state of free speech around the world, and I mean, you mentioned, Europe and Canada is not much better, and it's the only reason we haven't been cracked down. So the last two elections that Trudeau was in, and then this last election as well, those three elections stopped the passage of a law here called Bill C-63. I think it was initially under another name and number, but then they changed it to this one. But yeah, like you're saying, though, the law that they passed, if you if they suspect that you are going to post something that's going to incite hatred or violence, not that you have, but they can
Hmm.
house arrest for 6 months and fine you up to $75,000. I mean, that's in this law, and it's going to be passing this time around. They're talking about more hate speech laws because of all the pro-Hamas protests that have been going on since October 7th of 2023. Um, you know, Instead of using the laws that are already existing to stop them, they want to pass more hate speech laws. Like Canada is not little speech rights we have. We're going to be losing them, within Carney's term. So yeah, I mean we're not in good shape up here either. And then like the UK, I think I saw the figure of 30,000 people per year being arrested for tweets.
Yes, the numbers have been incredible, and I think it's even I don't want to say bipartisan because I think sometimes grafting other countries' political
Yeah.
disputes onto like the bipartisan narrative doesn't quite work, but it's a lot of kinds of speech. It's not a lot of it has been it might be considered like right wing speech, but it's also been some left wing speech, a lot of speech about Israel, a lot of speech about Palestine. It's been a really broad crackdown in the UK, and Um, I think there's a good way to perhaps that's the answer to your question about legal versus cultural. The UK really needs some better legal
Yeah.
protections.
But I mean, in the UK, you can say it was bipartisan because it was both Labour and the Tory governments that have put in speech
Sure.
codes. You know,
And the
whatever.
Online Safety Act
Yeah,
is
yeah. It's
yeah.
that was a. I mean, that was a ridiculous thing. But okay, right now with the grooming gangs, because I came back into public sphere, oh, the labor has done this with grooming gangs, but I mean, the grooming gangs have been going on since the '80s, and it wasn't just labor; it was labor and the Tories. It was both the two major parties that keep getting into power have turned a blind eye on this. So it's the same thing with the speech codes. And I'm not saying, it's the same thing in Canada. It's not just the Liberals. The Liberals have kicked it into high gear, but you had the Conservative government here monitoring speech and monitoring what people said. And they wanted, I think at one point, they wanted all research to go through them before it got published. Um, so, I mean, it was stuff like that. Like, so I think, I mean, at least in Canada, we just don't have that appetite. We don't have that thing for free speech. And I think part of it is there was a joke in the 80s that, the only thing Canadians are proud of is that we're not Americans. So we want you to use that to distinguish ourselves with, oh, we don't have, though we have protections on our speech and we'll protect people from harm and stuff like that. And, which I think is a shame. Look, I really, like I said, I really appreciate you giving me your time. If you have anything to say more about your book, I'll put links to where people can get it and I'll put links to your social, but, I'll go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if you want to pick up my book, Authoritarians in the Academy, it's available at most major retailers.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was good talking to
Yeah,
you. Have a good
yeah,
day.
absolutely. I enjoyed it.
And thanks everyone for listening.